Welcome, everybody. My name is John Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence at Trend Micro, and welcome to my first threat webinar series in 2023. This is February. We're going to talk about the shifts in the threat landscape. So I wanted to welcome you. A couple housekeeping things. There is a Q&A button. If you have any questions that come up during the session here, feel free to put it into the Q&A. I'll try to get to those at the end. If I don't answer your question, I'll try to get back to you outside of it with some answers for you. All right, why don't we get started here? So a couple of things before we get into the meat of it. This is my 9th year of doing these threat webinars. So I started many years ago doing one a month, and I pick different topics, try to give you some information about the threat landscape like we're going to be doing today. So on my 9th year, we'll see if I make it to 10. I also am celebrating my 27th year in cybersecurity this year. So been in this industry for a long time. Great industry, lots of things happening, obviously. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of burnout, but hopefully we can help with that with some new and improved tools, security tools that are coming out. Yeah, so it's been a long ride, been fun. I've been at Trend Micro for all of those, so it's been 27 years at Trend Micro, doing a lot of different areas of the work. Started as an SC, and now I just talk for a living, public orator for Trend Micro, and doing things like we're doing today. So let's get started on the topic. So I wanted to do shifts in the threat landscape. And what you're seeing on the screen here is a bunch of headlines that I pulled on the internet recently. A lot of them are doing the predictions. And what I wanted to highlight is the idea of ever more sophisticated cyber attacks. We've been talking about this idea and this notion that these attacks continue to get sophisticated. They're using sophisticated tools. They're using sophisticated attacks in the attacks that they're doing against people. Seems like that term and that phrase is used regularly, and I'm a little skeptical about it because once you actually dive into what's going on and what they're using, the tools they're using, a lot of it isn't really sophisticated, to be honest. Maybe what I think we're seeing more of is more of a sophistication in their ability to shift tactics and move to new ways of doing attacks. Maybe not the malware itself. So for example, ransomware, you look at ransomware malware, it really hasn't changed in many years. It's, all they've really improved in many cases is the encryption process, because they're using better encryption capabilities. They're doing better coding because, in the past, one of the things that we found was they would put their key in the code. So you'd be able to get the key very simply. Today, we rarely see that type of coding. It's better coding than we've had in the past. So you're unlikely to be able to uncover the decryption key for ransomware. So again, is this stuff really getting more sophisticated or not? I would say probably not as much, but we'll talk about that. This is a snippet that's going to come from our 2022 security review, year in review. So we're going to be publishing this in early March. But I wanted to highlight here, you can see this kind of a summary. 2022 was defined by volatile political conflict, economic instability, right? We saw a lot of things happening last year. But cyber criminal groups tried to adapt to carry on as usual, right? In our report on the security landscape of the past year, we show how groups adjusted to modernized enterprise security, shifted to more lucrative corporate targets, and focused on new ways to access victims' networks. And I wanted to highlight here, so one of the good positives that I think is coming out of 2022 and moving into 23 is you all who are defending your networks are getting better. Whether that's through better tools that you're deploying, better processes that you're doing, you're getting better educated about what's happening in the threat landscape. So you're actually able to defend your networks much more effectively I do a cyber risk index every 6 months, and I'm going to be publishing the second half cyber risk index, which is a survey of organizations like yourselves that we do around the world. Over 4,000 practitioners get surveyed, and the threat landscape continues to get worse. We see from the responses, but the preparedness is getting better. So it's good news, and I think it is actually making these threat actors and malicious actor groups get better, right? Get more sophisticated, I guess we're going to have to say about that. But certainly, it's interesting. I want to cover 3 areas today. And again, when I talk about the shifts in the threat landscape, I'm not going to cover everything because there's just too much of it. But I wanted to highlight 3 areas. One is initial access, which is, I think, an area that we're definitely seeing some shifts in. Tools of the trade, so we'll talk about that. And then financial gain. How are these actors actually shifting to make money? Because, and we'll see in a couple of slides on ransomware, it looks like ransomware is actually they're not profiting off ransomware as much as they used to. So let's talk about initial access first. So one of the most popular initial access vectors was actually the utilization of macros, malicious macros in Microsoft Office files. And this is where, again, shifts in the industry are making it more difficult for the threat actors out there. And what happened here is Microsoft made a change to their support of macros. So they basically, by default, changed the behavior of Office files that were coming in from the internet into an organization, and blocked any file that had macros in it enabled. They would drop. They wouldn't let it come through. But with that shift, these threat actors that were using tons and tons of malicious macro files in their initial access, phishing emails, spam emails, whatever it might be, downloads, web downloads, they weren't able to utilize these anymore because Microsoft made that change, and it affected everybody in the world about this. So that's good news. You can see, mail spam would come in, it would have an attached macro file, and a malicious macro file, and then it would drop that and do follow-up malware after that. But now it's blocked. And you can see here some of the threat campaigns that we were monitoring over the years. And last year, you can see container file is increasing, but the macro file was decreasing. Now, one of the alternatives we saw shifted late last year was the use of malicious advertising, malvertising. You can see Google ads leading to a malicious site. So they would get their sites, their web pages up in the Google search. And then when a victim would click on that, it would download malware to their computer. And again, not a macro-based malware. It would be some other type of malware that they were creating. So we saw malvertisements become more popular. And again, this just goes the constant ebb and shifts that we see in the threat landscape. When something doesn't start working as well as it used to, they're going to shift to something else that works. Now, again, let's talk about that sophistication. We've seen malvertisements utilized for years and years and years. So it's not a new threat. It's nothing new. We should have capabilities to protect against it, and we do. But again, it just shows that them shifting to this model. They also started to move to something that what do we call this? Smuggling, HTML smuggling. Where in this case, they take a legitimate email thread, hijack it, attach a HTML file, zip it, and then that drops some LNK, some DLLs, and Word file that has an exploit here. You can see at the bottom. So they shifted also to this initial access, where we saw more and more of them compromising email accounts and then taking and getting the emails from that account that had threads in them, going back and forth between that person and somebody else, and they would hijack it. insert this attached HTML file, and then they would send it on to the victim. So that's a new technique that we started to see them utilize. Another area, certainly in initial access, was the use of vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities continually are being used. You can see this is a chart from MITRE. You can see the number of CVEs published every year. And you can see since 2016, we've actually seen a pretty good escalation of CVEs detected. Again, CVEs are simply bugs that are found in vulnerability or in code. And then they are typically patched by the vendor who is affected. But in 2022, there were over 25,000 CVEs published by MITRE. Now, one of the things I've talked about in the past is this idea of shifting your patch management to more of a risk-based approach. And how you do that is if you look at the disclosed vulnerabilities, which is 25,059, but then how many are actually being exploited in the wild? And this data, 873. So you can see it's a very, very small percentage of the total number of CVEs. So as an organization, you probably don't need to patch all of these CVEs because most of them aren't ever going to be weaponized against you. So this comes from the CISA's known exploit vulnerability database. So that's 873. They continually add to this. So if you're not downloading that file, that Excel spreadsheet or whatever it might be from them, that can help you understand which vulnerabilities, CVEs, are actually being exploited in the wild. So those are the ones you really want to look at and make sure you patch them or you virtually patch them. But then on the lower right, you can see 37. This comes from Google Project Zero, who track zero-day exploits. So these are exploits that don't have a patch yet and are used in actual attacks. So they said 37 in 2022. So again, very, very small number. But these certainly are ones that are a little more critical because there is no known patch, unfortunately. Now, one thing that I wanted to share, and we actually did a talk on this at Black Hat last year, our zero-day initiative, which is our bug bounty program at Trend Micro. They were identifying that a lot of the patches that are coming out these days have limitations, gaps. They have, and what Google Project Zero actually found in the first half of last year is that 12 of the 24 CVEs, or not even CVEs, of vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities that were exploited were actually previously known patched vulnerabilities that there were gaps in it. So they actually created a variant exploit to exploit that patched vulnerability. So this is where we're going to start seeing more challenges as well. But again, vulnerability is going to be used, but they will be regularly used by the threat actors out there, but mostly it's going to be what we call end-day vulnerabilities. And these are known vulnerabilities. They're patched vulnerabilities. The N stands for the number of days they've been patched for. So it's certainly, those are going to be more exploited. Now, the other shift we started to see with vulnerabilities is you can see in 2021, the top 3 CVEs that were exploited were Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities. But in 2022, it shifted from Microsoft to 2 Log4j vulnerabilities and one pretty much an obscure one. And some of the things that we're seeing, the CVEs can be exploited publicly by a threat actor, and there's many dissections, write-ups, and analysts. So a lot of these vulnerabilities get disclosed, and there's a lot of information on the internet about these CVEs, which, again, the good people are not the only ones who are looking at that information. The bad actors, malicious actors, are also looking at that same information. So, these 3 had a very high or critical base score. The attack vector can typically be performed via the network. The complexity is low. and almost no existing privilege is required to exploit without user interaction, meaning these attacks can be automated. So that's the kind of information that they're looking for. Also, they've been highly reported in the news. Even a list of vendors or customer bases tend to show up in the news. So that's giving them all of this information. If there's a proof of concept code that's out there, that also helps them. They can just take that proof of concept exploit code and use it themselves. And we see that on a regular basis. So certainly vulnerabilities will continue to be utilized more so in the future than we saw in the past. I also wanted to highlight, this just came out on Dark Reading just the other day, that majority of ransomware attacks last year exploited old bugs. They were finding 2012, 2017. So again, this notion that end day vulnerabilities will be utilized in most of the attacks is coming true. And again, I go back to this idea of, are these sophisticated attacks? Well, if it's a known vulnerability that has had a patch out since 2012 or 2017, we're talking almost 11 years ago, probably not very sophisticated from that perspective. What they are looking for is people that are organizations that haven't patched it, right? So why haven't they patched it? There's many different reasons that could happen, but that's one of the main things that they're looking for is for these businesses that haven't patched these end day vulnerabilities. So, and it still works. So again, if it works, they're going to continue to use it. If it doesn't work, like the macro viruses that we talked about just a minute ago, then they're not going to use them. They're going to find something different that they're going to use. So access as a service. This is in the underground. This service is growing. A lot of actor groups are actually now offering access to networks, whether it's a business access, small business, medium, enterprise, large grade. They're offering those services in there. And there's 3 different types. So we actually published a report on this. There's 3 types of access as a service groups. There's the opportunistic sellers. These are people who just kind of fall into it. They maybe, for some reason, they were doing something and they got access to an account. And so they just quickly say, hey, I can monetize this access very quickly, put it up on an ad in the underground forums, and somebody buys it from them and it gives them access. Then you have dedicated brokers. These are the ones that are probably more likely or more important. These are ones who are dedicated to this offering. They will look for ways to get into these organizations and sell that access on a regular basis. And you have online shops as well. Some of the highlights you can see in the offerings by industry in the US, you can see 50% of the access were for education organizations. 12% were professional services, 9% technology. It goes down from there. So education certainly is one that is being sold a lot for. And as you can tell from a lot of the ransomware attacks that were in the news last year, education was definitely one of the top targets. When we look at offerings by region, you can see Europe, access to European organizations, number 1, North America is number 2, Asia number 3, and then down from there. And you can see on the bottom right, RDP access for sale. RDP remote services is a big one. If you look at the top 3 MITRE techniques or tactics that were abused last year, remote access was number 1. There was some other lateral movement type stuff we'll talk about in a minute, but the use of tools for lateral movement was another one. But here's the reason why access as a service is a growing threat. When you look at the difference in the monetary breakdown profits, for example, right? Ransomware gangs who buy access from an access broker, they will offer that access broker 20% of the profit. Media attention, though, the ransomware gangs get 100% of it. The access brokers get 0. So they are totally in the background, right? The law enforcement is probably not going to target the access broker. They're going to target the ransomware gang who perpetrated the actual attack. Visibility to victim, again, Mostly ransomware is going to be at 90% versus 10% of the access broker. Again, if you get hit with ransomware, you know it immediately, right? It's the noisiest, loudest, most visible threat we've ever seen in the world. When you get hit with ransomware, all of a sudden you got a bunch of pop-up screens that say you've been hit with ransomware, and you click here to go and negotiate a ransom with us. So you know absolutely right then that you have been compromised. What you don't know is, when did that compromise start? Because again, the access brokers are looking for stealth, right? They don't want you to know that they've gotten into your network, and then they will sell that access. And then responsibility over the attack. You can see here again, if they can't get access to your network, they're not going to be able to attack you. So 80% of the responsibility is probably from the access brokers themselves. Now, some ransomware gangs have all of these services themselves. So they perform the initial access, they do the lateral movement, they do the data exfiltration, and then they ultimately drop the ransomware to monetize it. But in many cases, that is being offloaded now to these access brokers, initial access brokers. So this is an area we certainly are going to have to pay attention to. The other aspect you have to understand now is that it's typically not going to be a single person or single group inside your network. You're going to have an initial access group in your network for a period of time, and then they will sell that access to somebody else who gets into your network and starts doing what they want to do. They could sell it to another group that does that as well. So certainly that's also a challenge we're going to see moving forward in dealing with these types of attacks. So some of the quick takeaways on initial access: document macro malware, pretty much gone, right? It's almost over. So that's the good news. Hopefully you already had some policies in play to not enable macros, but even if you did, now with Microsoft's new policy, you probably won't get hit with those. You may be able to use them internally, but again, if somebody is inside your network and they have access and you have enabled macros, they could utilize a macro-based malware inside for other purposes, lateral movement or exfiltration or whatever it might be. So you still may need to look at it, but as an initial access, probably not too an issue. They are definitely in the process of looking at new alternatives to gain initial access. So we certainly are seeing that. Vulnerabilities I mentioned earlier are going to be big ones. We saw just recently FortiGates have some vulnerabilities that are remote code exploitable. So that's going to be a challenge. These are routers and devices that are used in many organizations. Other types of access, certainly, as I mentioned, the email account compromise, where they compromise an email account and then utilize that account. Because again, you trust that account. It may be an employee of within your organization, or it might be a vendor you work with, third party you work with, and you get an email from that person that you've trusted and you've had email conversations in the past. Now they own that account, so they can do phishing or whatever they want to do from that. And then the known attack surface certainly is going to change. We continue to see this challenge. Cloud infrastructure is being targeted by more malicious actors out there. It's new technology, meaning usually you're going to have mistakes made, misconfigurations made. OT networks are definitely on the rise, being targeted. So if you have OT networks in your organization, those are an area you need to think about in 2023 to start maybe developing much more comprehensive security controls within that network itself. So that's another area we certainly are seeing. One area I didn't talk about was insiders. We certainly have seen in the past where malicious actor groups are recruiting insiders to gain initial access to networks. This is an area that you probably should think about and look at, especially as we are starting to see more layoffs in the tech sector. and other sectors. So disgruntled employees may do something to make some extra money, which would be in the form of giving access to malicious actor groups. All right, let's shift now to tools of the trade. The use of commercial pen testing tools has been growing pretty steadily over the last several years. You're probably familiar with Cobalt Strike. This is a pen test tool that has been used often in attacks, but we're starting to see less and less use of it because of the awareness that a lot of organizations are having with it. And they understand that it can be abused in their organization. So we're starting to see brute retell coming up in the underground. So a lot more use of brute retell, that tool is being utilized. OS built-in tools and programs. You can see living off the land binary scripts and libraries here. Here's a list of them on the right-hand side that we see used in attacks. So PowerShell certainly is one of the #1 items that we see. Regedit is another one, net.exe, you can see NLTest. There's a bunch of these. And again, these are tools that you're utilizing inside your network already, in a lot of cases. And that's what they want, because they want to hide themselves in the use of the same tools that you're utilizing. So they're abusing this by trying to keep their tracks uncovered. Because you may not realize that use of PowerShell that you do on a regular basis is being utilized maliciously inside your network. A lot of cases, some of the tools, the security tools, won't flag these as malicious because you get a lot of false positives because you're using them legitimately. So if we flagged every PowerShell execution as malicious, you'd get very upset with us pretty soon, because you'd be like, hey, I'm using this legitimately, and you keep flagging it as malicious. And it get upset. So there are cases where we have to look at context more than we do. So for example, if PowerShell is run by a user on their machine that normally doesn't use PowerShell, that could be a flag that you want to look at and flag them never have in the past. That could be where you could have a program that could look at that, understand, behavior, understand what applications are using on this device, and if it goes off script, so to speak, boom, we could flag it as use of that tool. Now, the other thing that we're seeing with the use we worked with one of our customers, where you can see at time 0, the initial access was gained through HTML smuggling. So that was that example I gave earlier, where there's a compromised email that had an attached HTML file that allowed them to gain access to that system. And then 16 minutes later, we saw the command and control communication and early reconnaissance being formed. So command and control infrastructure is an area that will typically happen in an attack, because that gives them continued access to your network from the outside. So that command and control communication occurred at that point. And 5 minutes later, they dropped brute retell, and brute retell was able then to start putting together and utilizing some of the OS-based tools that it supports. So within 5 minutes of the use of those OS tools for reconnaissance occurred. So they were able to start scanning the network using that tool. 10 minutes after that, you had a Active Directory reconnaissance using another tool that was available to them. And then 7 minutes later, they did lateral movement via Cobalt Strike started. So you can see from the time they initially accessed the organization, you had almost 40 minutes basically from the time they got access to where they were already doing lateral movement using Cobalt Strike. They had already reconned the Active Directory structure in order to find some accounts that they could look at escalating privilege against, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an area that we're definitely seeing improvements by the malicious actors, which is the speed with which they're doing these attacks. Again, it really depends on the motivation and what they're doing inside your network. But again, if they can do this stuff that quick, it just makes it much more difficult for defenders to deal with. It's similar to what we're seeing the window of opportunity with known vulnerabilities. So when a vulnerability gets patched and gets publicly patched or disclosed, we're seeing that window of the ability to create and utilize and weaponize that vulnerability into an exploit. That window has shrunken to, from weeks to days to even hours at this point. So, and here you're talking basically under an hour now, they're able to get access and then starting lateral movement and doing other activities. So quick takeaways, commercial pen test tools are definitely offering these threat actors the ability to be more efficient, more speedy during their attack. They also give them cover because you're utilizing these same tools and you may not realize they're being used maliciously versus legitimately. The use of OS built complicates detection and response because, again, I don't know if it's legit or not. Future attacks will definitely use less malware, we think, and more OS built-in and commercial tools.
John?
So again, depending on the area of the attack or the stage the attack is going to be, you may see less malware utilized and more of these legitimate tools being utilized because it offers them a lot of cover. It offers them better capabilities than the malware that they've used in the past.
John, we still can't see your slides.
Oh, none of my slides are showing?
Yeah, they're still not up.
Darn it. Sorry about that. How long has that been going on?
Just a few minutes.
All right. Let me know if you can see it now.
There we go.
Sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know, Amanda.
Sure thing.
Okay. Hang on one second. Okay. So you probably didn't see, were you able to see this slide, Amanda?
No, did not see this.
Sorry about that. So this is where I was talking about the time zero to the ability to do lateral movement. And again, just heads up, everybody, you'll get these slides. So I apologize for missing that. Some reason my Zoom keeps taking me out of Zoom mode. All right, let's talk about ransomware. Ransomware certainly is a challenge, right? This is where a lot of the monetary gains have occurred for malicious actors out there. They utilized ransomware for the last several years in order to take down organizations and extort them for a lot of money. We've been tracking a lot of the ransomware families. You can see here, we've been publishing a quarterly review of the ransomware groups that we saw the most active. So you can see in Q1 of 22, it was Lockbit, Conti, and Black Cat. Q2, it was Lockbit, Black Basta. In Q4, it was Lockbit, Black Cat, and Royal. What was interesting with Lockbit, and we'll talk about this, actually with Black Cat, they did some very interesting stuff within their activity. But Lockbit, which is what we call water Selkie, they introduced the first ransomware bug bounty program, which we thought was quite interesting for a malicious group to actually offer bug bounties for people to improve their code, improve their capabilities out there. So you can see they invited researchers, ethical and unethical hackers on the planet to participate. Remuneration varied from $1,000 to $1 million, depending on the bug that you found. The categories you can see on the right, so website bugs were probably big for them. Locker bugs, Tox Messenger, Tor network, doxing, even ideas, just brilliant ideas. We also published an article recently, because we actually have seen this in the underground, where they are offering monetary incentives to people who can come up with new ways to attack organizations. And so this is another area where you're going to start seeing more crowdsourcing capabilities in the malicious undergrounds, where they're going to start offering up monetary incentives to people to come up with new ideas, right? We do the same thing in the legitimate area out there. You've got think tanks out there coming up with new ways to do things. They're doing the same thing now in the undergrounds. And we're also seeing where a lot of these malicious actor groups are actually forming like legitimate businesses. We saw that with Conti in the past, where we saw their organization structure. They had salespeople, they had marketing people, they had Q&A, they had support personnel, they had coders, they had managers. So you can see that. We actually published a report today that goes into more of that business model of ransomware that you can take a look at on our website. But certainly, bug bounty program was a big one. Lockbit has been very successful. They were, one of the top, if not the top, ransomware groups last year in terms of monetary support and how much they made. But they banked on the strength of their affiliate group, affiliate program. So they offered very good cash out, basically, percentages to the affiliate group who actually performed the actual attack on these businesses. They're attuned to geopolitical issues that they can use to their advantage. One thing we saw recently with Lockbit is one of their affiliate groups targeted a healthcare provider that gave them some really bad press. So they actually offered the decryption key to that victim, and they said they kicked that affiliate out of their program. So they're actually trying to make sure that their affiliates follow their T's and C's. And then their malware performance is a big, strong selling point. So they're constantly updating their code. We've gone from Lockbit 1 to 2 to 3. We'll see a number of iterations this year as well. So that's certainly, these groups have to keep innovating and offering capabilities. A lot of automation is happening within these groups. So they're offering their affiliates more automation tools, tracking tools, UIs to manage their attacks. All of that is happening as well. This is something that's been interesting over the years. We see this, Linux is malware free. A lot of people seem to have that, think that is the case. Same with Apple with iOS. A lot of people seem to think iOS is malware free. Apple has done a very good job of minimizing the amount of malicious code on their platform, but certainly it is not free of malware. So that's this myth is kind of busted. So you can see here, we still obviously are dealing mostly with Windows-based attacks, Windows-based malware. So you can see on our network, our Smart Protection Network, which is our global threat intelligence, from January 1, 2020 to October 2022, we had ransomware detections in Windows of 218 plus thousand. Linux, though, was almost 5,000. So still a very small percentage, but Linux is there, right? It's 5,000. Virus totals had 48 million Windows versus 943 Linux. So they don't have a very good process of getting Linux-based malware into virus totals. So as you can see by the numbers of ours versus them. But one of the things you also notice is a lot of the ransomware groups are now supporting Linux-based ransomware malware. You can see Babuk, CheerScript, Hive, Black Cat, all have Linux-based malware. We also see a lot more use of Go and Rust. So some of these alternative operating systems that are coding platforms that are being supported. The main reason Go and Rust are multi-platform, so you can code once and then have it support multiple operating systems. And so you can see these ransomware groups, almost all of them support the Go language. A couple of them support Rust. All of them have a Linux variant of their ransomware malware that they utilize and offer to their affiliates. When I wanted to take a look at our malware detections in 2022 by operating system. So you can see this is, I think this is something around 20 million samples that we analyzed here. 71% are Windows-based, but 25% now are Linux-based. So we are definitely seeing a shift towards Linux. And one of the main reasons there is that if you look at the cloud infrastructure, a lot of the cloud is utilizing Linux, and Linux distros are widely utilized in the cloud infrastructure. And cloud is an area that is increasing in terms of the threats, the attack surface. So your cloud implementation or cloud infrastructure will certainly look to be targeted by malicious actors in the future if you haven't already. And then you can see 4% was Mac OS. So again, I mentioned Apple earlier, right? Apple certainly isn't immune, although they do a very good job of getting a perception out there that they are very secure and stuff. But a lot of that is because, again, we know Windows #1 operating system. The most victims are still running Windows, so that's where they're going to go to, because they want as many victims as possible. But 25% now is Linux and 4% is Mac OS. Now, ransomware is down. So you can see Chainalysis just recently came out with their year in review, a total value received by ransomware attacks from 2017 to 2022. You can see 2020 and 2021 were pretty similar at 765 million. 2022 is down 40% to 457 million. So you can see the contributing factors. Better protections. I mentioned earlier, you're getting better at what you do. We are able to detect a lot of these new ransomware variants. There was only a couple of new families introduced in 2022. So most of the regular ransomware malware that was out there is still being utilized, just new variants of it. And we've gotten very good using AI and machine learning and behavior monitoring technologies to detect that very quickly. So where we struggle in a lot of cases is with the malicious actors actually escalating their privilege onto an account that actually can turn off the security on the devices that they want to plant malware on. So we can't do our job if we're not running on those systems. And that's what they're doing, is to get around the security that can detect it very easily, they're turning it off. Enterprises, though, also are no longer paying. So you're getting better at being able to recover from a ransomware attack, where if they take down a system, you're able to recover that system very quickly. So you don't have to pay the ransom. And we're seeing that. More regulations, as well as insurance is getting tougher and tougher to obtain, to be able to pay for those ransomware attacks through insurance claims. And so all of those are contributing factors, we think, to the drop in that. So, but ransomware is definitely not going to go away, because there's still a lot of victims capability out there. There's a lot of businesses, small, medium, and large businesses, that can be targeted with ransomware. But and we published a report on the future of ransomware. You can see they're going to diversify. They're going to adapt. They're going to adopt other criminal business models. We think in the future, they're definitely going to be doing more business email compromise instead of ransomware. And if you look at the IC3 report and the FBI, they show actually business email compromise is way more lucrative to the criminals than ransomware. We're talking billions lost in business email compromise attacks versus, tens or hundreds of millions lost in just in ransomware. So certainly they're going to shift that. You can see here some of the different things that they do in their ransomware, but the evolution of ransomware, we're definitely going to see them targeting other types of endpoints, not just Windows. So Internet of Things, Linux. They're going to scale up through more increased professionalism and automation, as I said. So these groups will offer their affiliates much better tools, better capabilities, etc. On the revolutionary side, we're going to see some shifts more into maybe hacking cryptocurrency exchanges. So a lot of money still. Bitcoin's been going up quite extensively recently again. So the profit available to them in cryptocurrency is probably going to be increase more as those currency valuations go up. And like I say, replace ransomware payload with a business email compromise or some other type of malicious attack. So to conclude, ransomware model evolution is caused by a blend of profitable extortion schemes over the years. So they continue to look at new ways to extort organizations, right? We already have the extortion models where they have ransomware, and then they have data exfiltration, they do DDoS, they contact customers of the data exfiltrated to get you to pay your extortion fee. These small evolutions, a lot of them are being caused right now by sanctions. We certainly know that Russian groups, ransomware groups, were driving a lot of the ransomware attacks. And with the war going on between Russia and Ukraine and all the sanctions that are being imposed on Russia right now by the rest of the world are definitely causing challenges. We also are seeing a lot more bounties by governments against these groups and actors, so they have to go underground. And law enforcement has gotten better and has been able to arrest a lot of these actors as they move from one country to another. Large revolutions happen based on benefits and disadvantages of a changing environment and profitability. So just like any business, right? If I'm not profitable in an area, I shut down that part of my business and I go into the areas where there's new opportunity, new profits to be made. Same thing is going to happen with the malicious actor groups out there. This is just, again, you're going to get this these slides, but these are some resources we have on ransomware that you can see some links here that you have access to on our site. So let's shift now and finish this up on what you can do. First recommendation is audit and inventory. So you need to discover your attack surface, right? So we talk about attack surface discovery capabilities, especially your external facing assets. So definitely try to get that in order first and foremost, because if you can't see it, you can't secure it. So take an inventory, identify authorized and unauthorized devices and software, make an audit of event and incident logs. Make sure you have that in place. So that's the first recommendation. Second is configure and monitor. Manage your hardware, manage your software configurations. I mentioned misconfigurations. That's a big one. So if you can obtain a product maybe that can help you identify when a misconfiguration occurs. The other thing, obviously, you can look at is contacting your security vendor and making sure you do an audit of their security product to make sure you have the latest version of it. Make sure you have all the configurations enabled that need to be enabled to detect a lot of this newer threats that we've seen out there. Grant admin privileges and access only when necessary to an employee's role. This is a big one because account credential theft is huge. And I mentioned earlier, how do I not detect ransomware? I turn off the security product that is running in place to detect, that would detect it. So I steal a credential of that administrative account. Monitor your network ports, protocols, and services, especially on your external facing, because they will take advantage of those open ports that probably shouldn't be open, or services or protocols that are running that may not need to be running on those external facing devices. Activate security configurations on network infrastructure devices, such as your firewalls and routers, and establish a software allow list. So if you can implement a software allow list, whitelisting capability, then I would, on certain devices or certain servers, then do so, because they will run. But again, if it's tools that you're already running and you allow on that, that's going to be a little more difficult. But in many cases, a malware that is introduced would get flagged because it is unauthorized. Patch and update. Again, we talked about vulnerabilities. So conduct regular vulnerability assessments. Perform patching or virtual patching. If you're not familiar with virtual patching, that's utilizing IPS or IPS technology, both at the network, at the perimeter, as well as internal on your systems. But that virtual patch can help you because it doesn't usually require a reboot. You don't have to take systems offline to do the patching process, but it can virtually patch that system. Update all of your software and applications, especially your security products. Make sure you're running the latest versions of those. Make sure they have the latest security patches. Even better, go to a SaaS-based approach, because then the vendor themselves will patch for you. So you don't have to manage the patch process. They do it because you're running that cloud-based application, that SaaS-based application. And so they manage all of those for you. Protect and recover, implement data protection, backup, recovery measures, enable multi-factor authentication, especially on your critical accounts and access to your databases and your critical data. I would also recommend incident response. If you have make sure you have an incident response plan in place. Make sure that you have a business continuity plan in place, because again, the actors will look for your critical systems that run your day-to-day operations, try to take those down, because then you're more likely to pay an extortion fee to get them back online. Secure and defend. You may want to look at sandbox capabilities, because again, you want to run anything that's coming, any files that are coming into your organization, run them in a sandbox and let them see if they do malicious activities or not. Deploy the latest versions, detect early signs, use advanced detection. Again, this is why I say have a meeting with your security vendor, because they may have some new technologies that they've implemented that you have not taken advantage of and you're maybe not aware of. So, or maybe they implemented it, but it's implemented by default disabled because they're concerned about false positives or something. So you want to have that conversation with them. And then train and test, regularly train, set up a security awareness program if you don't have it, to regularly train your employees on how threats occur, how attacks occur. We just went through ours just recently and went through a bunch of videos on the types of attacks. We had, we do phishing simulations on a regular basis against our employees to make sure they recognize and can recognize phishing emails. Conduct red team exercises and penetration tests as well. So that's all I had today. I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A. So let's see. Yeah, and I apologize about not being able to see those slides, darn it. I didn't get an alert from Zoom that it had stopped sharing. I don't see any open questions at this point. So I will give you back a couple of minutes. Again, you will receive an email after this with a link to the slides, so you can take those. You'll also get access to the on-demand version of this webinar. This was live, but you will be able to share that with anybody you think might be needing of watching this. I will be coming back in March with another edition of my monthly threat webinar series with a new topic. So look for the invite as it comes out, or you can go on our website and look under webinars. You can find that as well there as to once I decide on what my topic is. So thanks everybody for attending today. I appreciate it. You all have a great day and stay safe and stay warm, and we'll talk soon. Bye.